Crime doesn't pay, and these days, in the world of white-collar crime, it'll cost you a whole lot more than it used to. In the case of insider trading kingpin Raj Rajaratnam, prosecutors are seeking a 24-year sentence for the former hedge fund manager. And if they get it, Rajaratnam would join an elite group of scoundrels: WorldCom's Bernie Ebbers, Enron's Jeff Skilling, Tyco's Dennis Kozlowski. For more on the sentencing and what it means for Wall Street, we welcome back our friend and expert on all things criminal, Doug Burns. Doug, you see him here as a former U.S. attorney, now running his own practice. So, Doug, sentences are supposed to be a deterrent to crimes of all sorts, not just white-collar crime. So let's talk about the sentencing. How many years is Raj going to get?
Well, it's funny. Deterrence is deter the person themselves and also deter others. And in this case, deterring others is the more important aspect. In other words, if Wall Street people theoretically see a high sentence, then they won't engage in this conduct. You could have 20 seminars on whether you agree with that or not. You also have punishment, and then restraint and so forth. Hard to handicap this sentencing, actually. I mean, the cynics would say he's a scapegoat if he's going to get 24 years. And then others would say, well, he should get that higher sentence. So what we do is we look at other people in the case, see what they got, and then try to mathematically figure out where we stand.
Other people in the case who have been convicted, how have they been treated?
Well, it's interesting. The average has been about 3 years, okay? But of course, they're lower level people. And the fly in the ointment, though, you might find interesting, is that Zvi Goffer got 10 years from Judge Richard Sullivan. So there's a couple things there. One, it's a different judge, so that doesn't necessarily mean that Raj will proportionally get the larger sentence. Because if it was in proportion to Zvi Goffer, in my view, it'd be something like a 20-year term. I don't think he's going to get that.
You don't think Holwell is going to go that far?
No.
What is Holwell's history? What is he known for?
Okay, I did a sentencing before Judge Holwell. He's very fair. He's very well respected. And his history basically is he doesn't automatically give necessarily what the government is asking for. Here, if you take the 19.5 and the 24.5, split it in half is 22, right?
How influenced do you think he could be by public sentiment, by Occupy Wall Street, standing outside?
That's a really good question, and it's interesting because a lot of times what happens is they give a very high sentence, and then later there are motions to adjust it. In my opinion, the sentence is going to be somewhere in the vicinity of 14 or 15 years.
Let's remind everybody who some of the other characters, shall we say, in this pantheon of white-collar crime are. We've talking about Bernie Ebbers. We mentioned him earlier. There's Dennis Kozlowski. There is. Let's roll it here. We've got there's Ebbers, and there, of course, is Jeff Skilling. I bring up these names to make a point, which is, in the case of Ebbers and Kozlowski, in fact, in the case of all three, they all got more than 10 years, did they not? 10 years is important, right? Doesn't it determine the kind of jail you end up in, or the prison? I should be more precise.
I'm glad you raised that, because actually I did read that, and I guess I knew that. But if it's more than 10, you may not be eligible for what they call a minimum security camp, which is
club fed, right?
Well, sort of outside the fences, in the front. Big difference between being behind the fences. And I've been to many camps, obviously, visiting people. But the point is, the 10 years is important. I think this sentence will exceed 10 years, however.
How strong could Raj's appeal case be? Even though the tapes were allowed in this trial, it was said it was unclear, and the judge wasn't necessarily completely comfortable. How strong would an appeal case for Raj be here?
Let me say one other thing. Very important today is whether he gets bail pending appeal, okay? So the judge has three choices. One, have him be put into custody immediately. Two, allow him to surrender himself, which makes you have a better situation with the Bureau of Prisons, and it takes them roughly 21 days to make the designation. Or three, have him out pending appeal. Out pending appeal is, A, you're not at risk of flight, and you might find this interesting. Before you're convicted, the government has to prove that you are a risk of flight. Now that you're sentenced to prison, you have to show that you're not. Isn't that interesting?
The burden of proof.
And then to Stephanie's point, and she's right, you also have to show that you have a substantial issue on appeal likely to result in reversal. And in this case, when Judge Holwell allowed the wiretaps in, he criticized the government in the opinion, that's what everybody's latching onto, saying they didn't disclose information about a critical informant and didn't disclose the fact that the SEC had gathered a lot of information.
So the wiretaps clearly were key in getting the conviction of Raj Rajaratnam.
No question about it.
But given the concerns, or at least the issues that Judge Holwell made about these wiretaps, are they going to work to Raj's detriment when it comes down to the sentencing, or might they work, or might the judge's concerns play to his favor?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think he's going to take into account that appellate issue. But the interesting thing is, if you look at their motion for bail pending appeal, as I did quickly, they get right into that. They say the issue on appeal, Your Honor, is the question of the wiretaps, and they raise the exact points I made, and that's going to factor in. And he's going to let him stay out probably on bail pending appeal.
You do think he could be out on bail? I mean, Raj has got friends with money in pockets all over the place. I mean, he's definitely a flight risk.
But here's where the government made a silly argument, Stephanie. You're not going to believe this. They turn around and say he's definitely a flight risk. He has tens of millions of dollars at his disposal, and he can go to Sri Lanka where he has tremendous contacts. But by the way, the government's position is he can surrender in 21 days. Well, wait a minute. Last time I checked, he could theoretically flee within the 21 days.
You can fly in 21 hours.
So how are they making that argument? And they didn't need to argue that because under the statute, if you follow me, it's both the risk of flight and the appellate issue. So the judge only has to find one of them.
Doug, thanks for coming. It's always good to see you here. You are our resident expert on white-collar crime. Doug Burns, former federal prosecutor, now with his own practice.